Hi, I'm John Rowland with Highland Park Lapidary, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a good arbor bearing. We have a lot of people that ask us, what to look for in a saw and how to choose a saw. And one of the things to think about when you're looking at a saw is how the arbor bearings are structured in the saw. The design of the arbor is really important because that's what holds the blade and keeps it running true without movement. Because if it's not running true, in other words, if it's not perfectly aligned with the flow of the carriage, as you slide the carriage, that blade should be perfectly parallel with that. If that can't be maintained by the arbor bearings, then the saw cuts will be poor. So right now I'm here with our HT10 saw, and this saw is basically modeled after an old Lortone design, which they called an LS10. And we basically looked at the design and thought, well, we could bring this saw back into the market, but there was things that we wanted to change about it. The number one thing was the arbor. The original arbor used this bearing here. This is a stamped steel bearing. You can see that there's a lot of free movement of the bearing in the housing. Now when you tighten it up, it does grip it some, but it's not as secure as a cast iron bearing. The original design had mounted this bearing inverted here, and there's not really any provisions for moving the bearing front to back. Now what we did is we put a lower platform in here, and that allowed us room for this much bigger, more heavy duty cast iron bearing. And this, as you can see, I can't move that insert around in the housing. It's firm, and it's just a heavy duty bearing. It's got a grease fitting so you can service it. So in the saw you can put grease into the bearing so it extends the life of the bearing. The stamped steel bearing, there's no grease fitting at all. It's got some grease inside the bearing, but at some point in time it's going to wear out and die. You'll see on our arbor assembly we have these adjusting screws here. Now there's two bearings. There's one inside here that has the adjusting screws, and then one on the outboard bearing. What we do is we lock down the inboard bearing, we center it with the adjusting screws and tighten it, and then we tighten the set screws onto the arbor shaft, and then we set the outboard bearing in, we get it centered, and then as you step around to the front of the saw, you'll see that we put in a dummy blade. You can use a regular blade and mark it. We have another video on aligning your saw, but by using those two adjusting screws on this kind of a setup, we allow it to be perfectly aligned, so as the carriage moves the rock through the cut, it's perfectly parallel. With this kind of bearing, you cannot do that. There's no means for really truly getting it aligned. So when you're looking at a saw, that's one of the important things to look at.